Brady, overall you did a nice job with your series. Your everyday or day in the life kind of theme certainly is fine. However, I think that it doesn't exactly fit with what you're going for here. We have your selfie and you have your dog, and certainly those are one category. Anytime that you have something alive, and then you have some, the rest of the series that are so abstract that it feels like two different portfolios. Even if you do see the rocks and the reflections in the pool and the wall every day, they're definitely stylistically very different, even though they're all basically have the same treatment. You said you went with pretty limited post-production. I think overall your exposures are good. You said you adjusted those. If we look at the histogram, this one's relatively low, and if you've seen on some of the other videos where I said you need to push this up, it depends on the image. And so for dark rocks, you would expect it to be pretty low. We can tweak these up a little bit if you wanted them to be brighter rocks. So even further levels is a great way to do that, because you can just move the slide over. We don't want to go past really probably at this point. You can see this little peak here, and usually when you have a really flat area like that, it kind of speaks to specular highlights. Here it's just a relatively bright rock in the midst of gray. So if we go too much further, we just get blown out image. One of the things about Photoshop though is that you can selectively edit your corrections using layer mask, and so we can maybe come in somewhere in there, which might be a nice balance overall, and then using a brush tool, painting with black, relatively low opacity and flow. I'm going to change the brush size here a little bit, much smaller, and then we just paint with black over the area that we don't want it to get too bright. And so you can see you can kind of blend that in. Because we're using a low opacity and flow brush with a 0% hardness, that means it's going to have a very feathered effect. And if we look just at the mask we did, you can see how soft that is. And that's really because of those three settings. And so you can see how that might look before and after. If you decide you like this kind of edit, and you decide everything needs to have a similar sort of increase, you can easily move your layers from one to another. Make sure you have your move tool selected, click drag to the tab, and then release once you're over the picture. Now of course, once you do that, we also introduced this little bit of the layer mask where we edited out that part of the bright, and that may or may not be the case, and so we want to disable that. And you can see it actually, right in here is where it fits. It's not horrible. It actually fits in with what else, the other part of the image. But anyways, you certainly don't need it. And so for this case, I would just say delete the layer mask, and then maybe bring it over to your other ones as well. No, definitely not that one. But we'll see how it fits in this one. This one I think works pretty well. This one here, we'll for sure need to correct that. This one here, we actually see there's room for the black point to come over, and that's just going to give it a little bit extra contrast, and so you can see how that gives it a little extra pop. Certainly this one here, the Bailey's, has some very dark areas. Probably again too much, but you can see it's just that easy to go ahead and make adjustments after the fact. You can get everything pretty close and then edit as needed. The other thing I see is you said you made a few corrections. One of the things you definitely want to get rid of are all of these dust spots. They're just what we call a visual anchor. It's a distraction from the overall photo. And the best way to do that is to add a layer above your background pixel layer. Use the spot healing brush tool and just click and drag as needed over it. You want your brush to be just a little bit bigger than whatever you're correcting. And you can see it doesn't take too long to go through and knock these out. You can do areas that are close together with one little click and drag. Because this is relatively undefined, you can probably even go with a little bigger brush and kind of swoop through there. The level of detail underneath is really going to determine how sloppy you can be. And using a big brush like this and kind of doing broad strokes is what I would consider a sloppy edit. But you can see it makes for a pretty seamless edit. You don't really notice that I'm going with a big sloppy brush. And in that case, then it's okay. Had we been doing this on something that was shot with a glass lens and actually had some detail of what I presume is maybe the road, then that would be a problem. Might also be a problem down here. Sometimes it does surprisingly well. Sometimes you don't know until you try it. The nice thing about it is you can always just give it a shot and then undo if needed. So again, I think these two don't really fit together with the other four. Just an abstract series actually be pretty nice. This kind of thing, and of course, clean it up first, would actually make for nice backgrounds for other things. You might add this as texture, or you might use it as like a frame for a regular portrait that was taken around the pool. Things like that. You can kind of build layers for images to make an overall new product. And so having these as abstracts works just fine in and of itself, but it can also be part of a greater overall piece. Generally speaking, I think you're on the right track. You certainly have pretty decent exposures. It's still a little bit underexposed. A little final additional tweaks would be good. When you're looking at your images for correcting exposure, definitely look at your histogram. You want to make sure, by and large, that the luminosity data, and that's what we see here, is basically spread out through the image. Here we see maybe we want to even darken it a little bit when we look at the overall histogram, but I think we're in pretty good shape. One reason that it might have looked bright enough to you and not to me is because I use a calibrated monitor, and that assures that what I'm seeing is actually accurate for the color data that's in the image. For example, one of the reasons that you would do this is because monitors tend to be set too bright, and if you calibrate your monitor so that the colors you're seeing are accurate, that means you're going to have accurate prints. Not that everybody does prints these days, however, it's going to make for a more universally appropriate look, and this is going to look reasonably well on any device that has color management. Some web browsers have that these days, certainly phones, and you just want to make sure that it looks good as it can for as many different platforms as possible. Let me know if you have any questions.